So, hello. I'm gonna do mic here so you can turn it down a bit. Hello. My name is Lembit Lõpp. I'm a lead engineer here at Pipedrive and in the core tribe at the moment. And I'm gonna talk to you about the journey to Convention UI, which is our component library. The core tribe, a tribe is something we call a team, but it's bigger, is a group of developers responsible for building central services and tools that other developers use. So component library fits perfectly into that schema. And Pipedrive itself is a software as a service sales CRM. The main application behaves as a single page application, which means that you're in a big application. When you navigate or do something, you're still in the same application. Everything is done in JavaScript and so forth. And as a CRM, it's quite complex because CRM is a customer relationship manager, and by its nature, you have lots of data to work with and lots of things to do. So the system is built using microservices. In the back end, it's easy; everyone knows how to do it. But in the front end, it's a bit more complex. We've done it so that some pages and some components within the pages are defined as microservices or microcomponents, or however you want to call them. And they serve a single purpose. For example, you can have a whole page that displays a list and all the nice buttons that go with it, and you can do all the nice things. Or you can just have a single button that opens a modal, and from there you can do some other magic, right? And with all that, as I said, it still behaves as a single page application. The way we brought the services, so to call, together is also an interesting topic, but I'm not going to talk about it today, maybe next time. And let's move on. So let's talk about the reasons why we wanted to build our component library. And in component library, by components, I mean the visual components that we saw in the previous presentation as well, not the micro-components. Micro-components are built using the visual components. So we did have major design inconsistencies, was the first reason. When we were building our application at first, it was a backbone application with some React parts. Many of we had something like visual components already, like buttons, and icons and whatnot. But they had so many different implementations. For example, our icons had 4 different implementations in live at one moment. For example, BNG images, font files, SVG images, whatnots. And people were really confused about what to use, or when you get the new icon, which one of those should I update? So lots of confusing times. Another issue regarding those components was that they did not work in every situation. So whenever you, let's say, program a button for your task, let's say it has to be a green button with 32 pixel height, you would program a green button with 32 pixel height. And whenever someone needs a red button with 24 pixel height, you don't have it. You have to write it yourself. So you would go and hack an existing implementation or make another implementation, and you would make a mess of it. And also, other projects needed the same design. As we started moving to the microservices or microcomponents, there were projects that wanted to use the same thing we had already defined in the, let's say, backbone application. But, well, how do you do code sharing in microservices? You either have a shared thingy or you copy paste, and that's bad if you copy paste, because whenever something is updated, you have to update it in multiple places. So those are the primary reasons why we moved towards our own design system. And the solution for us was the Pipedrive Convention UI, or as we like to call it, GUI, or CUI. doesn't matter. You'll hear both during this presentation. The first idea of GUI was to provide a standardized HTML and CSS for developers for common components, because back then we were still kinda in Backbone, and views and Reacts were not yet our thing. So version 0 was born when a JS library was built, and this library could output various components as HTML. It was implemented in very few projects because it's version 0, and the same idea didn't really work because who needs like plain HTML as a component? It doesn't really work. So version 0 with the same idea was skipped, and we jumped into version 2. This is the time when our microcomponents started emerging, and they were built using React. And we still have this cool designer, Karel, who liked hacking and doing stuff, and he took upon himself to build Convention UI 2 using React, and that was really cool. This version was then more used because new projects like out of the main things needed it, and it was really cool. A really cool way for the designer to promote it was to actually publish the design as code. So he used the same components he had built, gave us the code, and we were like, okay, now we don't have a job anymore. But we did because we still had to do this Redux magic or whatnot. So, and also this was when I first touched the Convention UI, and I was really happy, and then I was sad because obviously there were problems with the library. Now I'm gonna sound mean, but the library was developed by a designer. This this is all good fun and games, but when it's like first touch of React and you don't have much experience, then the outcome might not be perfect. It was a good job, but when I, as a senior developer back then, was expecting a higher quality from a reusable library, I didn't like it that much. And the whole organization was supposed to use it, so it had to be better. It also had really poor documentation, and so basically no documentation and no usage examples. Developers had really hard time using it because they basically had to go into the code to see how a component works. Not so good. Also regarding examples is that as the components were developed in a way where you would just write code and see what happens later, they didn't behave correctly in certain situation or just looked weird next to another component. So all in all, it was inconsistent with itself already, basically. And, oops. And different versions of the Convention UI 2 had different HTML outputs, which means that basically you should have had major versions if you would follow the semantic versioning. And this also meant that all of those little micro component services we had to bundle the library into their own project as well, meaning the bundle size would increase. I don't know if is it exponential? I don't know. But basically, each of the little parts we had would have to bundle the library, even though they're displayed on the same page. And currently, we have, when you go to our application, we have more than 50 of those micro components in use, and imagine if all of them would load the component library. That's a big bundle. So, version 2 problems. The solution is the new team COFE. So, due to the interest from other developers and myself and so forth, we created a new team called COFE, or the core front end. Me and Pavel, another senior developer, started it. And the COFE's job, COFE would later go into core, but that's the team time, a long time ago. COFE's job would be to build and maintain tools for the front-end developers. And our first tool we started building was the Convention UI and the version 3. And before doing that, we analyzed what we want to improve and see, make sure that all of it would work forever, the convention UI. So let's see what we wanted to do. So first we wanted to split the HTML and CSS part and React. So the HTML and CSS part would include the HTML markup that you need to output the component and the corresponding CSS. The HTML would only be as examples. You wouldn't like get any like tools to actually output it. You just had to know the structure. This is because we had projects that did not use React, or we would have libraries other than React in the future that could output the same HTML. For example, we could use Vue as well, and they would output the same HTML and therefore have the exact same look. And the React part then, of course, was the nice guy who outputted this HTML and applied the JavaScript logic necessary to make the components run. This idea was in 2017. We haven't added Vue support or Angular support or web component support, and we probably never will, but it was still a valid thing to do considering that we still are and were using Backbone. Secondly, we wanted to improve the documentation. And we wanted the documentation to be part of the code because when people usually don't want to retroactively deal with the documentation. And we wanted people to be able to play with the components as previously we had this weird blind development. So we built the documentation page or the playground, which included the README files from the components. Displayed them nicely, did some MD magic. We had the modifier classes in HTML and CSS part and props in React and all those things you need to use the component, or in case of HTML and CSS to use it without React or Vue. And the documentation page had those nice little examples we saw in Hannes's presentation as well, where you have the code and the example and you can play around it. It's really cool. And this was really nice to use. And also, when we developed the components, we developed them in the same documentation page where we write like the code, what you want to use in the component, and then see how it runs and if you get the correct visual output. So this basically made you write the documentation, otherwise it would have been almost optional. And thirdly, we wanted the convention UI to be shareable between projects, which means that we had to start using semantic versioning correctly as well. When you use semantic versioning, you can basically assume that the styles and other assets, they cannot be deleted or modified in a way that breaks the components API. So when planning components, we had to be super careful to make sure that we, from the day zero, we cover all possible variations of a component. So yeah. And no modifications is good, but this doesn't mean you can't add stuff. So for example, when we have a certain amount of colors for a button, we can always add a new color, but you can never remove a color within a major version. But if you want to do a major version modification, then I'll talk about it later. And this also allowed us to basically load the CSS once throughout our application, because when we have the latest styles loaded, then everyone is using the same styles because the class names are also locked, and you don't have to load it in each of the bundles we spoke about before. And we can also share the React as externals as well, so you don't have to bundle that as well if you really want to. And we wanted the quality to be excellent. All of our components would need to be unit tested, and like standard code quality things like linting and things like that would be added. Because we wanted our code to look really nice, so others would contribute. And we started building Convention UI 3 with all those things in mind. First, we started with the documentation environment because we needed it to actually build stuff. We did build our own one because in 2017 we didn't find any that would suit our needs, even though now there are excellent tools out there which I would suggest using. And after that, we started building our components one by one. It took me and Pavel the whole summer of 2017 to build all the components. Of course, we had vacations as well. That's why it took the whole summer. And in August 2017, we released Convention UI 3. Yay. Team started implementing it right away and migrating old projects which were using the old versions of Convention UI, either 0 or 2. It took some time, but eventually most front-end projects were using Convention UI 3. It was also encouraged to use it. It wasn't mandatory. It was encouraged because the visuals of the new Convention UI 3 were updated, and this was what the designers wished the application would look like. So, so we made some poking around in that regard, so people would update it. It's kind of nasty if your application has one button in one place and the other in another place, or those weird paddings we saw in Hannes's presentation. And also for this reason, we created a task force to update a huge chunk of the application to Convention UI 3, especially the backbone application. And this is where the separation of HTML and CSS and React came into play, and it was really handy to do things that don't use React without React. And after this, we had most of the application looking the same, and it was really nice. So we could consider the Convention UI a success, mostly because people started having problems with it. Some components had their bugs, and not all of the use cases were thought through. And there was a large demand for new components. So we fixed what we could, and we made new components, but obviously we couldn't fix everything. And we started gathering issues for a new major version, because again, we can't do breaking changes within one major version, and we don't want to give out major versions very often. And then, after a while, we started working on Convention UI 4. I think it was in 2018, beginning of summer again. So after a year of release, we started working on Convention UI 4. Now the teams were gone, and we had missions and tribes and whatnots. And we started a mission with 3 developers and a designer to create multiple new components and rewrite ones that had lost touch with their reality, I would say. And while we did that, we improved lots of things like documentation and usability of existing components. So Convention UI 4 was launched, and is the current major version being used. It was launched, I think, again, August or September 2018. The current version is something 4.9.1 and 4.6.13, who knows. And this is the version we're using right now. And with the possibility of the cross-tribe missions as well, which means that when you work in a tribe or a team, you can also work with another tribe or a team. Whoever had the chance to use Convention UI myself, which as like the library developer, I had never basically used it, so it was a nice opportunity. And when I was using it myself, I found out that it was really not that perfect. And I found some shortcomings. And And I simply fixed them using this inner source methodology, even though I was in the original creator tribe. This was, I think, one of the best things to do as a tool developer is to actually work with the tool, not just build it. Of course, getting the feedback from the teams is important as well, but you know, things get lost in translation, so using it yourself is a really nice thing to do. So this is the story so far. Regarding the future, we expect Convention UI to be used in all of our front-end projects. This slide is old because it's already used in, I'd say, 98% of the projects. But maybe used everywhere also would mean that our third-party people, the guys who build our marketplace applications, would be able to use Convention UI. At the moment, Convention UI is a private library, but I hope that we would go public and everyone else could use it as well, which would mean that we would get more issues, which we can fix, and everything is going to be perfect in the future. And also, React Native is cool, right? So we can use the exact same ideas that you would use in a web component library, in a React Native component library. And I would definitely enjoy building one for React Native as well, as we are starting to build applications in React Native in Pipedrive as well. A weird thing to do would be to use the, I don't know if anyone knows the React Native web, and then build basically one application using one code base, and then getting your web application and mobile application from one code base. But that's science fiction stuff. And of course, we need to keep on working on the tools and improving them constantly. This is an ongoing job, and new components will be added every day or every quarter, I don't know. Bugs have to be fixed, and one most important thing is that, again, when I use the tools, things have to be simple. When we see that one component is used and hacked together in all projects the same way, then obviously the component needs to be changed a bit. So the simplification and fixing of stuff is really, 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 really important. So yeah, that's it. Story so far about Convention UI. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, then fire away. I think there was one question from the previous round that I would want to answer, but I can't remember what the question was. Excellent question. I think Ketmar will answer that. But we decided to do it because we did a research to the existing ones, and if there are like minor visual things that it's hard to modify, I mean, when you use an existing one, you probably need to re-theme it, right? And if it's quirky in some way, it's gonna be a headache to rework it. So at one point, it's simply easier to build your own. And as we are big enough, we're like kinda in the big boys league with 200 plus developers or 300, I don't know. So it is a possibility for us, and we decided to do it. Any other questions?
Any advice on how to write the documentation for the library and how to spread it, you know, to make it easier for other developers in the company to adopt it?
Good question. It's still a really, really hard thing to do. Hannes had really good tips about it. Make it playful, make it easy, make it approachable, because I know our documentation at the moment is not perfect. One of the things we want to do in the following months is actually to rebuild the whole thing. At the moment, it's not that usable for designers. It has to be usable for designers, product managers, and developers. And and like really important part is like when to use a component, how to use a component, and sometimes even why to use a component.
Thank you. Any more questions? All right, then I think we can thank again Lembit for the presentation. And grab a beer, grab something to eat, and we'll continue in 15 minutes.